In the 1960s, grandmothers made 30 childhood dinners that tasted better than you remember. The meals were simple, comforting, and prepared with love in the most ordinary way. Back then, their effort often went unappreciated. You would sit down, eat without saying much, and leave the table without realizing what those moments truly meant. That is when it finally hit you. You were not just missing the food. You were missing her. Let's begin with the hamburger helper. Hamburger helper was the boxed dinner that saved busy weeknights when there was no time for anything complicated. Mom browned ground beef in a big skillet, and the smell of cooking meat filled the kitchen while you did homework at the table. She opened the box and dumped in the dried noodles and the flavor packet that turned everything into stroganoff or cheeseburger macaroni or beef taco. Water and milk went in, and the whole thing simmered on the stove for 15 minutes while the noodles soaked up all the creamy seasoned sauce. Everything cooked in one pan, which meant less dishes and faster cleanup. You ate it straight from your plate and went back for seconds because it tasted rich and cheesy and satisfying in a way that filled you up completely. Now when you make it, the flavors seem too salty and artificial, and you wonder how you ever ate it 3 times a week without getting tired. Spaghetti with meat sauce was the famous childhood dinner everyone ate weekly. When Mom stood at the stove, browning ground beef with onions, the smell traveled through the house and pulled everyone to the kitchen without anyone calling. She poured red sauce from a jar because making it from scratch took hours and weeknights moved too fast. Noodles boiled in salted water until soft enough to twirl easily. She mixed everything together so the meat sauce coated every strand completely. Parmesan cheese went on top until your plate turned white. That first bite tasted warm and simple and filled you up in the best way possible. Now when you try making it, the sauce comes out watery and the noodles stick together, and nothing matches what Mom made on regular nights when you sat down without thinking twice about how good it was. Lasagna was the special occasion dinner that showed up on Sundays and holidays when the whole family gathered around the table. Mom spent hours layering cooked noodles with ricotta cheese mixed with egg and parsley, then thick meat sauce and shredded mozzarella that melted into everything. The pan went into the oven covered with foil and baked until the edges bubbled and the cheese on top turned golden brown. The whole house smelled like garlic and tomato and baked cheese. She let it rest for 10 minutes before cutting into it so the layers stayed together instead of sliding apart. Every bite had pasta and creamy ricotta and rich meat sauce and stretchy cheese all in one forkful. Now, when you make it, the layers fall apart and the flavors taste flat, and you realize she made it look easy when it never was.
Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue.
Chicken Parmesan was the Italian dinner that made regular chicken feel fancy and special. Mom pounded chicken breasts flat with a meat hammer until they were thin and even. She dipped each piece in beaten egg, then pressed it into breadcrumbs mixed with Parmesan cheese and Italian seasoning. The breaded chicken fried in hot oil until the coating turned crispy and golden brown. She placed them in a baking dish and spooned red sauce over each piece, then covered everything with mozzarella cheese. The pan went into the oven until the cheese melted and bubbled. Spaghetti went on the plate first, then the chicken on top with extra sauce drizzled over everything. That first bite gave you crispy breading and tender chicken and melted cheese all together. Now, when you make it, the breading falls off and the chicken dries out, and nothing tastes as good as hers did. Beef tacos turned Tuesday nights into something everyone looked forward to all week long. Mom browned ground beef in a skillet and drained the grease before stirring in a packet of taco seasoning with a little water. The meat simmered until thick, and the kitchen smelled like cumin and chili powder. Hard taco shells heated in the oven until warm and crispy. She set everything on the table, and you built your own tacos exactly how you wanted them. Ground beef went in first, then shredded lettuce and diced tomatoes and shredded cheese that melted from the hot meat. Sour cream and hot sauce finished it off. The shells cracked when you bit down and everything fell onto your plate, but you kept eating anyway. Now when you make them, the shells break too easily and the seasoning tastes too salty, and nothing captures what taco night used to feel like. 5 childhood dinners revealed. Hamburger helper from the box. Spaghetti with meat sauce every week. Lasagna on special Sundays. Chicken Parmesan crispy and melted. Beef tacos on Tuesday nights. 25 more dinners ahead. These meals tasted better than you remember. Keep watching. Baked macaroni and cheese was the comfort food that appeared when nothing else sounded good. Mom boiled elbow macaroni in salted water until tender, then drained them in a colander. She made cheese sauce on the stove by melting butter and stirring in flour, then slowly adding milk while whisking until it thickened. Shredded cheddar cheese went in and melted into the hot sauce. The cooked noodles mixed into the cheese sauce, and everything poured into a buttered baking dish. More cheese went on top along with breadcrumbs for crunch. The pan baked until the edges bubbled and the top turned golden. That first spoonful delivered creamy, cheesy noodles with a crispy top that crunched between your teeth. Now, when you make it, the sauce comes out grainy and the noodles turn mushy, and you miss the perfect creamy texture Mom created every single time. Sloppy Joes were the messy sandwich dinner that showed up on paper plates because nobody wanted to wash dishes afterward. Mom browned ground beef with diced onions and green peppers until everything cooked through. She poured in a can of tomato sauce and stirred in brown sugar and yellow mustard and Worcestershire sauce. The mixture simmered on the stove until thick, and the kitchen smelled sweet and tangy. Hamburger buns toasted lightly, and the meat sauce spooned onto the bottom half. You picked it up with both hands, and the sauce dripped down your fingers before you even took a bite. The sweet, tangy meat mixed with the soft bun, and you needed napkins to clean up afterward. Now, when you make them, the sauce comes out too runny, and the flavors taste wrong, and nothing compares to the perfectly balanced sweetness hers always had. Chicken pot pie was the warm, filling dinner that appeared on cold nights when you needed something hearty. Mom cooked chicken in a pot until tender, then shredded it into bite-sized pieces. She made thick gravy by melting butter and stirring in flour, then slowly adding chicken broth until it thickened. The shredded chicken went back in along with frozen peas and carrots and diced potatoes. Everything mixed together and poured into a pie dish. Store-bought pie crust covered the top, and she cut slits in the middle for steam to escape. The pie baked until the crust turned golden and flaky. Each spoonful had tender chicken and vegetables in creamy gravy with pieces of buttery crust. Now, when you make it, the crust burns before the filling heats through, and the gravy comes out too thin, and you realize how perfectly she timed everything. Fish sticks and tater tots was the Friday night dinner that meant no meat because of Catholic tradition, or just because it was easy. Mom spread frozen fish sticks on one baking sheet and frozen tater tots on another. Both pans went into the oven at the same time and baked until the fish sticks turned golden and the tater tots got crispy on the outside. Ketchup and tartar sauce came out of the fridge and sat on the table in squeeze bottles. You dipped fish sticks in tartar sauce and tater tots in ketchup and ate them while they were still hot enough to burn your mouth. The fish tasted mild, and the breading crunched, and the tater tots were crispy outside and soft inside. Now when you make them, everything tastes bland and frozen, and you miss how satisfying it felt to eat simple food without overthinking it. Grilled chicken was the summer dinner that happened in the backyard when Dad took over cooking duties. He marinated chicken pieces in Italian dressing or barbecue sauce for a few hours before dinner. The grill heated up until the coals glowed red, and he placed the chicken on the grates. Smoke rose up, and the smell of cooking chicken mixed with charcoal filled the yard. He flipped each piece with metal tongs and brushed on more sauce until the skin got crispy and slightly charred. Everyone ate outside on paper plates with corn on the cob and potato salad on the side. The chicken tasted smoky and sweet and juicy when you bit into it. Now when you grill chicken, it dries out or burns, and you can never get that perfect balance of crispy skin and tender meat Dad managed every single time. 10 childhood dinners down, hamburger helper in one pan, baked mac and cheese with crispy tops, sloppy joes on paper plates, chicken pot pie on cold nights, grilled chicken in the backyard, 20 more dinners coming. Keep watching to see what else disappeared. Chili Mac was the one-pot wonder that combined 2 favorite dinners into something even better. Mom browned ground beef in a big pot with diced onions until the meat cooked through and the onions turned soft. She added a can of tomato sauce and a can of diced tomatoes with the juice and stirred in chili powder and cumin and garlic powder. A can of kidney beans went in next, and everything simmered together while the flavors mixed and the kitchen started smelling like chili. Elbow macaroni cooked in a separate pot of boiling salted water until tender, then drained. The cooked noodles went straight into the chili and stirred through so every piece got coated in that thick red sauce. Shredded cheddar cheese melted on top while it was still hot. You ate it from a bowl with a spoon, and the combination of pasta and chili and melted cheese hit different than eating them separately. The beef was tender, and the beans added texture, and the macaroni soaked up all the seasoned tomato sauce. Seconds happened without thinking, because one bowl was never enough. Now when you make it, the chili comes out too watery or too thick, and the noodles either get mushy or stay too firm, and you can never find that perfect balance she hit every time. The flavors taste close, but something is missing, and you realize she probably added a secret ingredient she never told anyone about, because that was just how moms operated back. Pot roast was the Sunday dinner that filled the house with smells that made you hungry hours before it was ready. Mom seasoned a big chunk of beef with salt and pepper and browned it on all sides in a hot Dutch oven until the outside got a dark crust. She added chopped onions and whole garlic cloves and poured in beef broth until it came halfway up the meat. Carrots and potatoes went in around the sides, and the lid went on tight. The whole thing cooked low and slow in the oven for hours while you watched TV or played outside. When dinner was ready, the meat fell apart with just a fork, and the vegetables were soft, and the broth had turned into thick gravy. She served it on plates with the vegetables on the side and spooned extra gravy over everything. That first bite of tender beef soaked in gravy tasted rich and comforting and made you feel full and satisfied. The carrots were sweet and the potatoes absorbed all the beefy flavors. Now, when you make it, the meat comes out tough and dry, or the vegetables turn to mush before the meat finishes cooking. You follow recipes and use timers, but something always goes wrong, and you miss how she could throw everything in a pot and walk away, and it turned out perfect every single time, without measuring or checking. Turkey TV dinner was what happened when Mom and Dad went out for the night and you got to eat in front of the television. The aluminum tray came out of the freezer with turkey slices and gravy in one compartment and mashed potatoes in another and corn and a brownie in the smaller sections. The whole thing went into the oven still frozen and baked for 45 minutes while you waited and watched the clock. When the timer went off, the tray came out piping hot, and you had to peel back the foil carefully because the steam burned if you got too close. The turkey was already sliced thin and covered in brown gravy that spilled over into the mashed potatoes. The corn sat in the corner with a pat of butter melting on top. Everything tasted better because you ate it on the couch with a TV tray while watching your favorite show. The turkey was tender, and the gravy was salty and rich, and the mashed potatoes were creamy even though they came from a frozen tray. The brownie at the end was small but chocolatey and finished the meal perfectly. Now when you see them in the frozen aisle, they look sad and small, and you wonder how you ever thought they were a treat. The portions seem tiny, and the ingredients list is full of words you can't pronounce, and you realize those dinners were convenient but probably not great, and you only remember them fondly because eating in front of the TV felt special. Chicken noodle soup was what Mom made when someone got sick or when the weather turned cold and you needed something warm. She started by boiling a whole chicken in a big pot of water with celery and carrots and onions until the chicken cooked through and the broth turned golden. The chicken came out and cooled on a plate while she strained the broth to remove the vegetables. She shredded the chicken meat off the bones and threw away the skin and bones. The shredded chicken went back into the hot broth along with fresh diced carrots and celery. Egg noodles cooked right in the soup and soaked up all the chicken flavor while they softened. Salt and pepper seasoned everything, and sometimes she added fresh parsley at the end. You ate it from a big bowl with saltine crackers crumbled on top. The broth was clear and flavorful, and the chicken was tender, and the noodles were soft and comforting. Each spoonful warmed you from the inside and made you feel better even if you were really sick. The carrots added a little sweetness and the celery gave it a fresh taste. Now, when you make it from scratch, it takes forever, and the broth never tastes as rich and flavorful as hers did. You use store-bought broth to save time, but it comes out thin and bland, and you miss the depth of flavor that only came from boiling a whole chicken for hours. Canned soup is faster, but it tastes like salt and chemicals, and nothing like the real thing Mom made. Beef enchiladas were the Mexican dinner that took time to make, but tasted incredible when they finally came out of the oven. Mom browned ground beef with onions and added a packet of taco seasoning with water and let it simmer until thick. She warmed corn tortillas in a skillet one at a time so they were soft enough to roll without breaking. Each tortilla got filled with seasoned beef and shredded cheese, then rolled up tight and placed seam side down in a baking dish. Red enchilada sauce poured over the top until all the rolled tortillas were covered completely. More shredded cheese went on top in a thick layer. The pan went into the oven and baked until the sauce bubbled around the edges and the cheese melted and turned slightly brown. Shredded lettuce and diced tomatoes and sour cream went on the table as toppings. You served yourself by lifting out 1 or 2 enchiladas and adding whatever toppings you wanted. The tortilla was soft, and the beef was seasoned perfectly, and the sauce was tangy and slightly spicy. The melted cheese held everything together, and the cold toppings balanced the hot enchiladas. Now when you make them, the tortillas tear when you try to roll them, and the sauce is either too spicy or too bland, and you can never get the right amount of cheese. The flavors are close, but not quite right, and you realize she had that recipe perfected through years of making it while you are still trying to figure it out. 15 childhood dinners revealed so far. Chili mac in 1 pot. Sunday pot roast that cooked for hours. Turkey TV dinners on the couch. Chicken noodle soup from scratch. Beef enchiladas rolled by hand. 15 more dinners still coming. These meals were better than you remember. Swedish meatballs were the party food that showed up at potlucks and family gatherings and always disappeared first. Mom mixed ground beef with breadcrumbs soaked in milk and a beaten egg, and salt and pepper and a little nutmeg. She rolled the mixture into small meatballs about the size of a walnut and placed them on a baking sheet. They baked in the oven until browned on the outside and cooked through. While the meatballs cooked, she made gravy by melting butter in a pan and stirring in flour, then slowly adding beef broth and heavy cream. The gravy simmered until thick and smooth. The cooked meatballs went into the gravy and simmered together so they soaked up all that creamy sauce. She served them in a dish with toothpicks stuck in each meatball so you could grab them without getting your fingers messy. The meatballs were tender and flavorful, and the gravy was rich and creamy with a hint of nutmeg that made them taste different from regular meatballs. You could eat 10 of them without realizing because they were small and delicious. They tasted good hot or warm or even cold the next day. Now when you make them, the meatballs fall apart in the gravy or come out dry and dense. The gravy either gets too thick or stays too thin, and you can never get that perfectly smooth, creamy texture. The nutmeg flavor is either too strong or not there at all, and you miss the subtle balance she achieved without ever measuring anything precisely. Tuna melts were the quick dinner that happened when there was nothing else in the house except canned tuna and bread. Mom opened a can of tuna and drained all the water out by pressing the lid down. The tuna went into a bowl, and she mixed in mayonnaise and diced celery and a little bit of salt and pepper. Sometimes she added sweet pickle relish for extra flavor. The tuna mixture spread onto slices of bread, and a slice of cheese went on top. The sandwiches went under the broiler in the oven until the cheese melted and bubbled and the bread toasted around the edges. You had to watch them carefully because the broiler worked fast and they could burn in seconds. They came out hot with melted cheese and the tuna mixture warm underneath. The bread was crispy and the tuna was creamy, and the cheese added richness. You ate them with potato chips on the side because that was the rule. Each bite had crunch from the toasted bread and celery mixed with creamy tuna and melted cheese. Now when you make them, the tuna mixture comes out too dry or too wet, and the cheese burns before the bread toasts. The celery pieces are either too big or you forget them completely. You try different types of cheese, but none of them melt right, and you realize she knew exactly how long to leave them under the broiler and which cheese to use, and you never thought to ask before it was too late. Chicken teriyaki was the Asian-inspired dinner that made regular chicken taste exotic and special in the 1970s. Mom cut chicken breasts into strips or cubes and placed them in a dish. She poured bottled teriyaki sauce over the chicken until it was completely covered and let it sit in the refrigerator for a few hours. When dinner time came, she heated oil in a big skillet and added the marinated chicken pieces. They cooked quickly over high heat, and the teriyaki sauce caramelized and turned sticky and dark. The kitchen smelled sweet and salty and slightly smoky. White rice cooked in a pot on the stove and steamed until fluffy. She served the chicken over the rice and spooned extra sauce from the pan on top. Sometimes she added steamed broccoli on the side for vegetables. The chicken was tender and the sauce was sweet and savory at the same time with a hint of ginger. The rice soaked up the sauce and every bite tasted flavorful. You ate it with a fork, even though it felt like you should be using chopsticks. Now when you make it, the chicken comes out dry or the sauce burns in the pan before the chicken cooks through. The bottled teriyaki sauce tastes too sweet or too salty, and you try making it from scratch, but it never comes out right. The balance of flavors is off, and you miss the simple version she made with just chicken and bottled sauce that somehow tasted perfect without any extra effort. Stuffed bell peppers were the dinner that looked fancy, but was really just a way to use up leftover rice. Mom cut the tops off green bell peppers and scooped out all the seeds and white parts inside. The peppers stood upright in a baking dish. She browned ground beef with onions and mixed in cooked rice and a can of tomato sauce and salt and pepper and garlic powder. The beef and rice mixture filled each pepper all the way to the top. A little extra tomato sauce poured around the peppers in the bottom of the dish. The pan went into the oven covered with foil and baked until the peppers were tender and the filling was hot. Near the end, she took off the foil and added shredded cheese on top of each pepper and put them back in until the cheese melted. The peppers came out soft, and the filling was savory, and the melted cheese on top added richness. You ate the whole thing, including the pepper, which tasted sweet and soft after baking. You ate the whole thing, including the pepper, which tasted sweet and soft after baking. Each bite had tender beef and rice and tomato sauce with the mild flavor of the bell pepper. Now when you make them, the peppers either come out too crunchy or too mushy, and the filling is bland or over-seasoned. The rice gets dry or the meat is greasy, and you can never get everything to finish cooking at the same time. The cheese on top burns or doesn't melt, and you realize she had the timing perfected. Beef chili was the cold weather dinner that cooked all day and made the house smell incredible. Mom browned ground beef in a big pot with diced onions and green peppers until everything cooked through. She added cans of tomato sauce and diced tomatoes and kidney beans and pinto beans. Chili powder and cumin and garlic powder and a little bit of cayenne pepper went in for seasoning. Everything simmered on low heat for hours, and the longer it cooked, the better it tasted. She stirred it occasionally, and the flavors mixed together and got richer. When dinner was ready, she served it in bowls with shredded cheese and sour cream and chopped onions on top. Saltine crackers or cornbread came on the side. The chili was thick and hearty and full of tender beef and soft beans. The spices warmed you up from the inside, and each spoonful tasted different because the flavors were layered. The cheese melted into the hot chili, and the sour cream cooled it down. You went back for seconds and thirds because one bowl was never enough. Now, when you make it, the beans fall apart, or the meat is tough, and the seasoning is either too spicy or too mild. You follow recipes with exact measurements, but it never tastes as good as the chili she made without measuring anything. The depth of flavor is missing, and you realize that cooking it all day was the secret, and you don't have that kind of time anymore. 20 childhood dinners complete. Swedish meatballs at potlucks. Tuna melts under the broiler. Chicken teriyaki with bottled sauce. Stuffed peppers standing upright. Beef chili that simmered all day. 10 more dinners left. The best ones are still coming. Stay watching until the end. SpaghettiOs with meatballs was the canned dinner that tasted better than it had any right to taste. Mom opened the can with a can opener and dumped the contents into a small pot on the stove. The orange sauce with tiny round noodles and mini meatballs heated up while she stirred occasionally to keep it from sticking to the bottom. The kitchen smelled like tomato sauce and something slightly sweet. Within 5 minutes, it was hot and ready to eat. She poured it into a bowl, and you ate it with a spoon because the noodles were too small for a fork. The SpaghettiOs were soft, and the sauce was sweet and tangy, and the meatballs were tiny but flavorful. Each spoonful delivered that familiar taste that somehow felt comforting even though it came from a can. You ate it when you were homesick from school or when Mom was too tired to cook something complicated. It showed up for lunch on Saturdays when you wanted something fast. The orange sauce got all over your face and you needed a napkin after every few bites. Sometimes she made grilled cheese sandwiches to go with it, and you dipped the sandwich into the sauce. The combination of the crispy, buttery bread and the sweet tomato sauce tasted perfect together. You finished the whole bowl and sometimes asked for seconds, even though one can was supposed to be enough. The meatballs were processed and probably not real meat, but you didn't care because they tasted good. Now when you see SpaghettiOs in the store, they look artificial and childish. The bright orange color seems fake, and the ingredient list is full of preservatives and sodium. You buy a can anyway for nostalgia and heat it up and take one bite, and it tastes exactly the same as you remember, but also completely different. Your adult taste buds notice the artificial sweetness and the mushy texture and the lack of real tomato flavor. You eat a few more spoonfuls, trying to recapture that childhood feeling, but it doesn't come. The magic is gone, and you realize it never tasted that good in the first place. You were just young and hungry, and it was easy and convenient, and that was enough. Now you want real pasta and homemade sauce and actual meatballs, and a canned version feels like a sad substitute. You finish the bowl anyway because throwing away food feels wrong, but you know you won't buy it again. Meatball sandwiches were the messy Italian dinner that required a plate underneath because sauce dripped everywhere. Mom made meatballs by mixing ground beef with breadcrumbs and egg and Parmesan cheese and Italian seasoning. She rolled them into balls about the size of golf balls and browned them in a skillet until the outside got crispy. Red sauce from a jar poured over the meatballs, and they simmered together for 20 minutes until the meatballs cooked through and soaked up the sauce. Italian bread or hoagie rolls split open, and the insides pulled out to make room for the meatballs. She placed 3 or 4 meatballs in each roll and spooned extra sauce on top. Mozzarella cheese went on top of the meatballs, and the whole sandwich went under the broiler for a minute until the cheese melted. The sandwiches came out hot with melted cheese and red sauce dripping down the sides. You picked it up with both hands and tried to take a bite without everything falling out. The meatballs were tender and juicy, and the sauce was rich, and the bread soaked up all the flavors. The melted cheese held everything together, but sauce still dripped onto your plate. Each bite had meat and cheese and sauce and soft bread all combined. You needed napkins and had to wipe your face between bites because the sauce got everywhere. The bread was crispy on the outside and soft on the inside and perfect for soaking up extra sauce. Halfway through, eating the sandwich fell apart, and you finished it with a fork. Now, when you make meatball sandwiches, the meatballs are either too dense or fall apart completely. The sauce is too thin and makes the bread soggy, or too thick and doesn't spread right. The cheese doesn't melt evenly, and you end up with cold spots. The bread is either too hard and hurts your mouth, or too soft and disintegrates. You try different recipes and techniques, but nothing works as well as hers did. The meatballs never have that perfect texture that was firm enough to hold together, but tender enough to bite through easily. The sauce never has the right balance of sweet and savory. The cheese melts, but doesn't get that perfect stretchy quality. You eat the sandwich and it tastes good, but not great, and you remember how hers were always perfect. The meatballs stayed together, and the sauce was flavorful, and the cheese melted just right, and the bread held up until the last bite. You finish eating and clean up the mess and wonder how she made it look so easy. Homemade chicken nuggets were what Mom made before McDonald's took over, and every kid started expecting fast food. She cut chicken breasts into bite-sized pieces that were small enough for little hands to hold. Each piece got dipped in beaten egg and then pressed into breadcrumbs mixed with salt and pepper and a little bit of garlic powder. The breaded nuggets went on a baking sheet and into the oven until they cooked through and the breading turned golden brown and crispy. The kitchen smelled like baking chicken and toasted breadcrumbs. When they came out of the oven, she let them cool for a minute so they wouldn't burn your mouth. Ketchup came out in a small bowl for dipping, and you ate them one after another until the plate was empty. The breading was crunchy, and the chicken inside was tender and juicy. Each nugget tasted like real chicken, because it was real chicken and not processed mystery meat. You could see the actual texture of the meat when you bit into it. Sometimes she made honey mustard by mixing honey and yellow mustard together for a different dipping sauce. The sweet and tangy combination worked perfectly with the crispy chicken. You ate them for dinner with French fries or tater tots on the side, and it felt special even though it was a simple meal. The homemade nuggets took time to make because each piece had to be dipped and coated individually. She stood at the counter doing it while you watched TV or did homework. By the time they came out of the oven, you were starving, and they tasted incredible. Now when you try making homemade chicken nuggets, the breading falls off during baking or doesn't get crispy. The chicken dries out or stays raw in the middle. You try baking them at different temperatures and for different times, but can never get it right. Store-bought frozen nuggets are easier, but they taste processed and artificial. The breading is thick and mushy, and the chicken inside doesn't taste like real meat. Fast food nuggets are convenient, but they are expensive and full of ingredients you can't pronounce. You eat them anyway, because making them from scratch takes too much time and effort. Fish and chips was the Friday night tradition that came from a place downtown that wrapped everything in newspaper. Dad picked up the order on his way home from work and brought it in a big, greasy bag. The smell of fried fish and potatoes filled the car and made everyone hungry before he even walked through the door. Mom spread newspaper on the table and dumped everything out. Thick pieces of battered fish and golden French fries piled up steaming hot. Malt vinegar and ketchup came out of the fridge and sat in the middle of the table. You grabbed a piece of fish and it was almost too hot to hold. The batter was crispy and crunchy and shattered when you bit into it. The fish inside was white and flaky and tender. Malt vinegar splashed over the fish and fries, and the sharp, tangy flavor cut through the grease. The fries were thick-cut and soft inside with crispy edges. Salt covered everything, and your fingers got greasy and covered in batter crumbs. You ate with your hand straight off the newspaper because plates seemed wrong for this kind of meal. The fish was fresh and perfectly fried and not greasy despite being deep-fried. Each bite delivered that satisfying crunch followed by tender fish. The fries were addictive, and you kept reaching for more even when you were full. Sometimes there were little containers of tartar sauce for dipping, and the creamy, tangy sauce paired perfectly with the fried fish. The whole meal felt casual and fun and different from regular dinner. Everyone sat around the table, eating with their hands and laughing and talking. The newspaper underneath soaked up the grease, and when you were done, everything got rolled up and thrown away. No dishes to wash, except for cups and forks, if anyone used them. Now when you get fish and chips from a restaurant, it comes in a plastic basket lined with paper that doesn't absorb anything. The fish is greasy, and the batter is thick and heavy. The fries are thin and soggy or overcooked and hard. Baked chicken drumsticks were the easy weeknight dinner that Mom made when she needed something simple. She bought a big package of drumsticks from the grocery store and arranged them on a baking sheet in a single layer. Salt and pepper and garlic powder and paprika sprinkled over every piece until they were completely covered in seasoning. Sometimes she added onion powder or dried herbs if she was feeling creative. The pan went into the oven and baked for about an hour until the skin turned crispy and golden brown. The chicken cooked in its own juices and the skin got crackly and delicious. The kitchen smelled like roasting chicken and garlic, and it made your stomach growl. When they came out of the oven, she let them rest for a few minutes so the juices settled. You grabbed a drumstick by the bone and bit into the crispy skin. The meat underneath was tender and juicy and fell off the bone easily. The seasoning created a flavorful crust on the outside. Each drumstick was the perfect size to hold in your hand and eat without needing a knife and fork. The dark meat was rich and satisfying. You ate 2 or 3 drumsticks and felt full and happy. Mashed potatoes and green beans usually came on the side, but the chicken was the star. The best part was eating the crispy skin and the meat near the bone, which was always the most flavorful. Sometimes there were leftovers, and cold chicken drumsticks the next day tasted almost as good as they did hot. Now when you bake chicken drumsticks, they come out dry and tough. The skin doesn't get crispy and stays rubbery and gross. You try different temperatures and cooking times, but can never get it right. Beef and bean burritos were the school lunch favorite that showed up in the cafeteria every other week. At home, Mom made them by browning ground beef with taco seasoning and opening a can of refried beans. The beans heated up in a pot, and she mashed them smooth if they were lumpy. Flour tortillas warmed in a dry skillet until soft and pliable. She spread refried beans down the center of each tortilla and added seasoned ground beef on top. Shredded cheese went on next, and the tortilla folded up into a tight burrito. The rolled burritos sat seam side down in a baking dish and went into the oven for a few minutes until the cheese melted and the tortilla crisped slightly. Shredded lettuce and diced tomatoes and sour cream came out as toppings. You put your burrito on a plate and added whatever toppings you wanted. Salsa or hot sauce went on if you liked spice. The first bite broke through the soft tortilla and revealed the warm filling inside. The beans were creamy and the beef was seasoned and the cheese was melted. The combination was simple but satisfying. The tortilla held everything together and soaked up the flavors. Each bite had a little bit of everything. Sometimes the burrito fell apart halfway through and you finished it with a fork. The beans and beef mixed together on the plate and you scooped them up with pieces of torn tortilla. The meal was filling and cheap to make. One burrito was enough, but you could easily eat 2. At school, the burritos came in plastic wrap and got heated in industrial ovens. They were smaller and drier than the ones Mom made at home, but you still ate them. The cafeteria version had less cheese, and the beans were thicker, and sometimes there was rice mixed in. You bought chocolate milk to go with it and ate at the table with friends. Chicken dinner was the layered casserole that took over the oven and fed the whole family. Mom cut up chicken pieces and arranged them in the bottom of a deep baking dish. Sliced potatoes went on top of the chicken in overlapping layers. Sliced carrots and onions scattered over the potatoes. Cream of chicken soup, straight from the can, poured over everything without mixing. A little bit of water or milk thinned the soup so it spread easier. Salt and pepper and dried herbs sprinkled on top. The whole pan covered with aluminum foil and went into the oven. It baked for over an hour until the chicken cooked through and the vegetables turned tender. Near the end, she took off the foil so the top could brown. The house filled with the smell of roasting chicken and vegetables. When it came out of the oven, the soup had turned into thick gravy and everything had cooked together. She served it by scooping out portions with a big spoon. Each plate had chicken and potatoes and carrots all covered in creamy gravy. The chicken was fall-apart tender, and the vegetables were soft and flavorful. The potatoes had absorbed the chicken juices and tasted rich. The gravy tied everything together and made every bite moist and delicious. You ate it with bread to soak up extra gravy. Second helpings happened because one serving was never enough. The leftovers tasted even better the next day after all the flavors had time to sit together. You ate them cold from the fridge or heated up in the microwave. The chicken stayed moist and the vegetables held their shape even after reheating. Now, when you try making layered chicken dinner, the chicken comes out dry and tough. The vegetables are either undercooked and crunchy or overcooked and mushy. The soup doesn't turn into gravy and stays watery. The bottom burns while the top stays pale. Fried Fish Friday was the Catholic tradition that happened every week, whether you were religious or not. Mom bought frozen fish fillets from the grocery store and let them thaw in the refrigerator. She set up a breading station with 3 bowls in a row. Flour in the first bowl. Beaten eggs in the second bowl. Breadcrumbs mixed with salt and pepper in the third bowl. Each fish fillet got dipped in flour first and shaken off, then into the egg and completely coated. Finally into the breadcrumbs and pressed so they stuck. The breaded fish sat on a plate while oil heated in a big skillet. When the oil was hot enough, she carefully placed the fish in, and it sizzled immediately. The fish fried for a few minutes on each side until the breading turned golden brown and crispy. She moved the cooked fish to a plate lined with paper towels to drain the excess oil. More fish went into the pan, and the process repeated until all the fillets were done. The kitchen smelled like fried fish and hot oil. Tartar sauce came out of the fridge, and lemon wedges sat on a plate. You served yourself a piece of fish and squeezed lemon over it. The breading was crunchy, and the fish inside was white and flaky. Tartar sauce added creamy tanniness. French fries or coleslaw usually came on the side. The fried fish tasted better than anything you could get from a restaurant. Chow mein was the American version of Chinese food that showed up in the 1970s when everyone thought it was authentic. Mom made it by cooking chicken or beef cut into thin strips in a hot wok or large skillet. The meat browned quickly over high heat, and she pushed it to the side. Chopped celery and onions went into the pan and cooked until slightly soft. A can of bean sprouts drained and added in. A can of water chestnuts sliced and mixed through. Everything stirred together over high heat. Soy sauce poured in along with a little bit of sugar and garlic powder. Cornstarch mixed with water went in last to thicken everything into a glossy sauce. The whole thing cooked for a few more minutes until the sauce coated everything. She served it over crunchy chow mein noodles from a can. The noodles came out in a block and broke apart on the plate. The hot meat and vegetables poured over the top, and the crispy noodles softened slightly from the sauce. Each bite had crunchy noodles mixed with tender meat and crisp vegetables, all coated in salty, sweet sauce. The water chestnuts added crunch, and the bean sprouts added texture. The meal felt exotic and different, even though it was just vegetables and meat with soy sauce. You ate it with a fork because chopsticks were too hard. Sometimes there was fried rice on the side made with leftover rice and scrambled egg and more soy sauce. The combination felt like a complete Chinese meal, even though it probably had nothing to do with real Chinese food. Now when you try making chow mein, the vegetables turn soggy and limp. The meat is tough and overcooked or raw in the middle. The sauce is either too thin and watery or too thick and gluey. The cornstarch makes everything slimy instead of glossy. You can't find crunchy chow mein noodles in a can anymore and have to use regular noodles, which get mushy. Cacciatore was the fancy Italian dinner Mom made when company was coming over. She browned chicken pieces in a large skillet with olive oil until the skin turned golden. The chicken came out and sat on a plate while she cooked onions and bell peppers in the same pan. Garlic minced and added when the vegetables softened. A can of diced tomatoes poured in along with tomato sauce. Dried oregano and basil and a bay leaf went in for seasoning. The browned chicken went back into the sauce, and everything simmered together for 45 minutes. The lid stayed on, and the chicken cooked low and slow until tender and falling off the bone. The sauce thickened and the flavors blended together. The kitchen smelled like tomatoes and garlic and Italian herbs. She served it over pasta or with crusty bread for soaking up sauce. Each piece of chicken was tender and covered in rich tomato sauce with soft peppers and onions. The sauce was slightly sweet from the tomatoes and savory from the herbs. The chicken absorbed all the flavors while cooking. You ate it slowly because it was a special meal. The pasta underneath soaked up the sauce and tasted incredible. The bread mopped up every last bit on your plate. The leftovers tasted even better the next day. Now when you make chicken cacciatore, the chicken dries out or the skin gets rubbery. The vegetables turn to mush or stay too crunchy. The sauce is watery or too thick. The flavors don't blend right and taste one-dimensional. You follow recipes, but something is always off. The chicken sticks to the pan or burns. The tomatoes are too acidic or not acidic enough. The herbs taste bitter or you can't taste them at all. You add wine like fancy recipes say to do, but it makes it taste weird. You remember Mom never used wine, and hers was perfect. 30 dinners, 30 memories, 30 moments when Grandma stood at the stove and made something simple that tasted like home. You sat at the table. You ate without thinking. You left without saying thank you. Now you understand what you lost. Those meals were never just about the food. They were about her time, her effort, her love poured into the most ordinary moments you took for granted. If you remember any of these dinners, drop a comment right now and tell me which one your grandma made best. Hit subscribe because these meals deserve to be remembered. And maybe tonight, try making one yourself.